We are composing a culture with one work upon another.
The Pathfinders project is a preservation project that aims to make electronic literature available for generations beyond us. This project is very important because if you think about it, early digital literature represents a cultural moment and a historical change in the way we think about literature.
In Pathfinders, we used a concept called traversal, a way of capturing author and user interactions on the work's original platform.
I wanted the reader to feel that there were distinctly different human stories.
This is fundamentally embodied.
Somebody told me it was their bedtime story every day, and it was a lot of fun to do, and I also found telling the story that way appeal to the social media nature of the audience.
We think this method of preservation, in conjunction with things like migration and emulation, will keep crucial works alive so that future readers can better understand them. Without a doubt, we have the potential to transform the field of digital media preservation. This multimedia book is just the beginning.
Welcome to the live stream traversal of Deena Larsen's second major work, Samplers. It was published in 1997 by Eastgate Systems, Inc. Dene is here live with us today at this traversal, and I'm delighted to have her, and you'll be hearing her read in just a few seconds. I'd like to start by welcoming everyone to this event. This is the second of 7 that we're offering this year. This event is funded by the Buchanan grant that I received from the WSU system, and it is part of the electronic literature series sponsored by the organization. With me today helping are the students in the undergraduate researchers and the L team here at the Electronic Literature Lab, and Nick Schiller, who is my associate director. I want to thank Greg Philbrook and John Barber for their production expertise. I'm going to turn this over to Dene, and once again, thank you for joining us.
Thank you guys very much, as I get to see an old friend who I haven't seen for about 20 years, so, you know, we'll go through this as we can. I started this, as you can see from my t-shirt, maybe not my t-shirt, at the Hypertext 1993, where I learned the intricacies and the weirdnesses and the beautifulness, you know, of story space. So what we have here is Samplers. She's got 9 different quilts. Each of these is a highly structured story, and the story is based on the pattern in the quilt. The 2 that we're going to go through, hopefully if I have time, so I'll do this real fast, are Devil's Claws and Fire Wheel. Devil's Claws shows you the structure of the 2 masks, and it's going to show you the plot of this. So we put our little twinkly toes on, and you can see how the links kind of go there. We click on the link, and this is Devil's Claws. This is the only one that has a clause, or get it, legal clause, never mind, in the body of the work, and you can see that it's quite intricately linked. One of the things we're not going to do is read the story in the link, so there are actually 2 layers, actually 4 layers of stories. We're only going to get the top layer. Okay, here we go. This is important. Whereas the party of the first part, being of sound mind, hereby bequeath, bestow, and provide upon the second party of the second part, perhaps also of sound mind and stout body, these his only true worldly possessions, and his protectors for the sole benefit of the party of the second part, under the penalty of death, destruction, and mayhem. Okay, here we go. And this also has different story parts. Hopefully we get to read the Masks one first. Masks 1. Doctor, you wanted to speak with me about those masks up there above my bed. Well, yes, it is quite strange the way that they leer through these layers of paint and rough clay. They've been in my family for centuries. And they're so old, no one remembers when they first came to watch over us. Legend has it that they'll devour my family if I'm not careful. Oh, it's silly, I know, but, well, you did hear about it. I'm sure you did. And unfortunately, okay, we're going to have to do it this way. Okay. No, this one does work with a return. What we are going to do is follow a return path, a default path, which I did program so that rather than flipping with all the links, we can just do a simple story. You can go many different places for this. Masks too. You know, I honestly don't know how those masks got out, but you know, the surprising thing was how much they could eat when they finally started in. I mean, after the bloody offal behind the fish shops down the street. Now, I think they took in the flower shop by mistake, but I haven't convinced Mrs. Johnson of that yet. Well, they mashed the fan dancers and the faro dealers from the Moon Club. And again, there are quite a few links, but we're not going to follow them. Masks 3. Then they picked through the garbage by the frat row, fighting over the used condoms and the wet coffee grounds, and they were chasing each other with the leftover bottles. Now, those masks would have stayed there forever, I think, had not the Phi Thetas thrown all those old cakes off of their second story. Masks 4. And the street was pretty well torn up, and I thought the masks would stop after they shocked themselves silly over the loose wires on the radio shop. But, you know, Dean Gordon's new compact convertible and Mr. Larsen's black Mercedes, you know, I think they liked the black leather strips. Well, that came next, and Sam's liquor store went in there, too, somewhere. Now, how those masks ate the bicycles in front of Max's Burgers and spit out the tires intact, I will never know. But I contended in court that the cheerleading squad should not have screamed that way. And why weren't they at a football game or something instead of sipping Cokes with Max? It was too bad about Max, though, even though his hamburgers were a bit greasy. And Mrs. Alton's poodle, that would have topped it off had not those telephone pole repairmen, not been so hasty about their missing poles. Mother. So we have the mask side. All of a sudden, we've gone to a default to Mother. So we now have a new character with a new font screen. Mother 6, so we are in the default not going through this linearly, which is interesting. No idea why I did that. Anyway, there was a reason, I'm sure. The deaths of the telephone repairman brought the manslaughter charges up to 9 counts, and Mrs. Alton insisted on suing me for a new pedigreed poodle. She wanted to claim additional emotional distress, but the mood of the town was against her. I bought a new suit for Dora to wear on her first day in court. Dressed in a gray linen skirt and a white blouse, Dora looked sober enough for anyone to believe her. "That's not what we want," Mr. Wilkins, my lawyer, hissed at me. "We need people to buy into a not guilty by reason of insanity plea." Let's see where we go. The reason why the default doesn't take you through the entire Mother chapter is I wanted to make this short. Okay. Aftermath. The charge of harboring dangerous animals was dropped when they hauled the masks into court. Anyone with half an eye can see that these are nothing more than brittle clay held together by ancient paint, the judge declared. I wish the manslaughter charges had been so easily dismissed, but, you know, the pictures of the damage done and the teary accounts of half the town had decided my daughter's fate. I can visit her every other Saturday from 9 to 11 at the Bellevue National Mental Hospital. I take her candy and home-baked cookies. The masks seem particularly fond of chocolate chips, she tells me. And now there's quite a bit more going on here, and trust me, it is a funny story. If you ever get a chance to read it, which it's kind of dead, so I guess you won't. Let's go on to Firewheel. Doing okay on time? Firewheel is the center of everything, and okay, there is conventions. Every word in here, by the way, is a pun, and a lot of times there's a visual of the pun. Let's see if I can click on Firewheel. Firewheel is at the center, and at the very center of the whole quilt, you can see that it is burning. Again, you'll see that this is extremely intricately linked. This little link up here is a bug in story space that allows you to choose default links if you had linked the first character of the page. And actually, I'm going to try to fight this because I really do want to show this. I lied. You can see the links. And Mark Bernstein didn't realize that this is what I was doing, but there is a story in these links. So if you do get a chance to read these, go through this. Instead of a letter, if I had more time to write you, I would tell you how my students laugh into their hands at my Japanese or my foreignness. Here in their hills, foreigners are so seldom seen. I would tell you that the street lamps here replace stars. Here, strident calls from markets give way only to the soba man, whose ancient croons now crash from loudspeakers into the thin paper of my fragile walls. I would describe these sounds of the koto, mixing fiercely in with the howls of the night train, the ancient still, battling against the new. And we would watch the shadows of the monks in the temple gardens misting into the still, burnt odor of chants and green tea. And I would ask you lightly about your aspen mornings and the elk in the garden, watching. I would not tell you what lies at the edge of the dark hills I climb each night to my home. Note, by the way, that there's also a secondary story, and somebody did a PhD on this, I forget who, that of the dark hills goes to Firefox, I climb each night goes to Firefox. So there's not only a story here, but there's also a story with additional tinges of meaning if you look at the names of the spaces. So also on here, each of these has their own directions. I did not read the directions for Devil's Claw, but each direction introduces the work. And oh, by the way, these directions will not work because we are on the, if you can see this, we're on the CD-ROM version of this work, and it says so on the back here, CD-ROM or Windows. Here is the CD-ROM. The only time that these actual directions worked was the first time we published it with the Macintosh version. So yes, you're right, we have faulty directions. Don't worry about it. When you're a foreigner in a small town in a Japanese town, when you're a foreigner in the small Japanese town at the turn of the millennium, translate these images into your own language. Translate their word, gaijin, as outside person, not as foreigner, and still you will not understand the terms. Okay, we can click onto here. And again, we're going to have links, but that's okay. They are the ones who watch me. And I'm going to try a return default here. So all I'm doing is hitting return and getting the pretty reading that you should get when you're doing a reading on tape. There's much more to go, as I said. Traveling home. At night, I walk my bicycle up a hill to my home, past the rice paddies behind the small graveyard, across a tiny bridge with a deep ravine that no one but old men enters. And then I pass the shrine where the fire never seems to go out. Warming myself. Also in this one, you can read this forwards or backwards. I believe the default is going forward. It's been 20 years, don't quote me on that. Okay, warming myself. That sharp night, I left the bicycle at the side of the hill and climbed over the 108 dark moss ancient steps to warm myself at the fox shrine. The old man who greeted me politely every morning hovered over the fire. Kitsune, he said. He pointed to the shrine and motioned me to sit down. I nodded. He did nothing. There are links, and in this particular version, I colored the links. In some of these stories, I did not. The old man. The old man spoke no English. My feeble attempts at his language died that night. I held my hands over the fire, warming them. He held back. I stayed, silent. I did not tell him I could not move. I watched his hands veined with the reds and the bloods of the fire weave patterns into the sky. Later, much later, He brought out a bowl of mulled rice wine from the fire, sprinkled cinnamon from an American tin on it, handed it to me. We drank. Proofs. The old man handed me Polaroid pictures of the shrine, each dotted with a thin wraith of yellow-orange, and I handed them back one by one, carefully touching only the edges. Some of the fire shapes had ears, others had long, sinewy bodies. One was merely a tail hanging on nothing. You can see, again, how these, I've been just hitting return, but what I'd like to do now is, because I'm curious, go ahead and hit on hanging on nothing. See what happens. Bonfire. They or their ancestors dance here since the beginning. They laugh, clasp hands, and give their bodies up to their fox god. Smiling serenely, the little stone god does not move. Sometimes the children run before it, slurping melons and throwing gaily colored paper deep into the flames, waiting, trusting in the muttering fire. Yes, I do remember this. By the way, this is the center of the entire piece. It links not only to every other page in Firewheel, but if you came here and read the they, be nice. Oh, right, because we have to, the first one does, if you hit a return, this first character, you can get into, you are forced to do a choice. So you are actually forced to come over to the side and look at those. But if you come over here and you read this sucker in order, you go into one line, like if we clicked on ancestors and then we came back to the page, to the bonfire, because everything centers around the bonfire. This is the key to samplers. This is the center load. If you click on ancestors, you come back here, the old man here. I don't know how I've returned home. I'm searching the air for nothing, and nothing is not linked. But this is another way through the work. They are the ones who watch me. Oh, be nice. Where did it, okay. How I got there, I don't know. Anyway, we'll leave it at that. There are a lot of things in this story, but you can see that the fire, this is the bonfire. It is the center of the entire work. And it's actually quite easy to get to. Another way through the story. How much time do I have?
You still have like 15 minutes.
I have 15 minutes. All right. I was only going to show these two works in depth, but because we're working on the CD, it is a little bit awkward to show all of the links. So since I have the floor for 15 more minutes, we're going to go ahead and read Century Cross. No, we're going to read Caught Out. Caught Out is one of my favorites in this work in that it is the only one that is in fragments. Each of these pieces, and again, you can see it is pretty intricately band, goes to another page, and you can see the fragments. This is the actual story with two different voices going on, and you can see how they are caught on the edges of the piece. Actually, we can just go to one of the edges of the piece. So, actually, let me introduce the story. This story has its directions as well. I guess I'm not going to be able to get there. And it's about a small child. And this is the first side. I took the number 8 bus today because it's my birthday and that's how I feel. Mo says to match numbers with your age and you'll get lucky. Johnsy, my best friend, she says that matching numbers can either get you killed or get you lots of money, which she then says is the same damn thing. Now, I asked my mama once if we could take this bus, and she said, no, damn it. That goes to the other side of town. And I asked her what was wrong with that, and she just said, well, it's not our side of town. Inside the rods. I go into the shop with the bright lights like I think nothing of it. I look at the dark space inside this silver box with the top open, 'cause someone says something's in there. And I turn my head sideways, even backwards, and I don't see anything. And I find a step stool so I can see under the light, and I climb up and I look in, and I even use the corners of my eyes, and I scrunch up my eyes tight closed, and then I open up. And suddenly, there they are. I see these 3 kittens all curled up in a torn wicker basket. And they look at me like they want out of that dirty old basket with its ugly torn lining, and I look back at them. You see, they were stuck in this silver box thing, and this box was empty. I could see that, but they were there anyway. So they couldn't get out because they weren't really in our space, but I know they wanted to be out there in the store with me, and I keep turning my head looking at how they were caught there. They have their paws up to me, begging. Missing. The only thing missing was the sound. I mean, other than that, you couldn't hear any mewing or voices or anything. The kittens were really there. I mean, their fur was all perfect, combed out with each little hair, and you could even see the bulges where their breath was supposed to be. And then their white whiskers got stuck right up there in mid-air, and they were just asking me to come out. Only you have to hear them right to understand that bit. And I reached in to pull them out by the paws. Thin air. And then the kittens were gone, and my hand didn't feel nothing but air. And I screamed out loud to make them come back, but they wouldn't, and I waved my hand harder, faster, more. And my arms kept striking at the nothing air, and I lifted the box up, and I shook it hard until all the little silver bits and mirrors broke into pieces and scattered everywhere on the floor. And then there was nothing. Not even light there anymore. Under a rock. From the nothing air, an alarm sounded, and clerks in jackets and ties meant to scare the good out of you came running from everywhere, and the air screamed at me. What rocket? I crawled up from under. Where were my parents, such a little monster? And did I realize that hologram setup cost well over $10,000, and how was I going to pay for that? You crazy kid. Well, I kept shaking my head. I mean, no use answering the air. And they put me in a back room, and they went to look for my mama, and they told me if they moved, they'd hang me up so high I'd never even get down. I better not touch anything else in there, you hear me? Well, I didn't tell them nothing about where my mama was, so I'm going to be in here for a long time. And there isn't even a TV or nothing to look at. Johnsy says when their TV's busted, she just looks in her own head for the pictures. We'll just follow this link. Oh, no, we won't. This is going to go all the way over there. We'll just pretend that didn't happen. But you can see on here that that back door is here. Let me do this right. That back door is linking from inside here. So you can see the structure, even with this view, that you are stuck in this one place. And if I've got enough time, yeah. I do? Mm-hmm. Okay. I'd like, so that's caught out, or caught it, or pay for it yourself. So I'd like to go into Century Cross, and what I'd like to do with Century Cross is show you, this is an interesting work where this is the actual story, but foreground and background have different types of stories. The purple are various commentaries, a Navajo report, a swastika, the Hopi warning, Navajo creation. This is the coyote story, and Coyote goes around, and I will just tell you the ending, and finds a nothing pouch and decides it would be a really good idea to use it and turn the world into nothing. You'll note that there are themes running through each of these works that we've talked about, hanging on to nothing. This is now, I wrote this before 9/11. Yes, I've been working for the government for 27 years. It's a little scary. And I can't get over on this. Ah, there we go. This side. So this is a true thing. But storyteller, this would be me writing this true story. When the Oklahoma bombing, after the Oklahoma bombing, the government shuts down tight. And I had some work that Washington wanted and some work my boss wanted. And I found myself trapped in the Bureau building more times that summer than I could fathom. And then you get a lot of work done. I'm just going through the story real fast. I go to bed at 2 o'clock in the morning. The ceiling falls in with a resounding crash. My heart pounded out of my chest. But actually it was a picture on the other side of the women's room. It had fallen about 10 feet in front of me, and I looked around and I saw nothing. I stood up, held my breath, pushed on the door slowly, so slowly I could feel my hands throb, still nothing, put my hand out and stared, no one. crept out into the hallway, which was still lit. And I walked down the hallway, no one around, no shadows playing on the beige walls, and I kept walking, slowly, silently. And then a picture leapt off the wall about 15 feet in front of me. Glass shattered and spun everywhere. And that did it. My heart ran screaming for the stairs. We'll go on, ran screaming to... Oh, no, he won't. Okay, fair enough. And some of these then do not actually follow the main story. This guy is going to come over here. It's these battles which change the world, forcing us somehow to go on with the dying. So in this center, the storyteller figures out that she's meeting the coyote. And she says, I'm sorry to the coyote. I'm sorry I disturbed your rest, but I need to get these reports out. So just let me stay here tonight and let me get some work done. The elevator opens, I swallowed hard. A coyote in a quaint old jacket and waistcoat with a large leather pouch tied firmly to his nose. It was definitely not what I was expecting. He looked at me from the elevator door, the hall lights flecking his yellow eyes yellow, then brown. Hi? I didn't know what else to say. You can see me? He queried, strutting into the hallway and preening by the light. He looked at his wavy reflection on the silvery elevator door. Aren't I fine? What do you think of my carved horn buttons? Weren't those great jokes? Everything goes boom! Weren't you just scared? And he rolled out scared until I shivered as mice do when the cats played with them. And I forced out a laugh at his quirky humor. If I can ask, what's that thing tied to your nose? He drew himself up proudly and pointed to his black-tipped nose. This is a nothing pouch. If I ever opened it, then the nothing inside would gobble up the everything outside. Nothing would be left. That's a fine, strong weapon, he continued. Much more powerful than any of the weapons you have. I nodded unsteadily, my hands only now beginning to shake. And you're going to use this to... He sat down among the glass shards and told me the story, which goes back to his story. I nodded sympathetically, and we struck a deal. I would see what stories I could tell of him, and he would keep the nothing pouch closed tight. And it was the best I could do at the time. And yeah, that's probably why I wanted to read this, because, you know, we still have this deal going on 20 years later. I would like to show you the story that goes inside this, simply because it's a bit fun. So let's see if I can go back over here. Again, on other screens you were able to see both at the same time, but as I was programming this, and we have the provenance, we ran into a few bugs. And in fact, this whole version uses a bug, so it's a little bit of a shaky system. And so this is my story for Eastgate. I called Eastgate again, directions, because calling the 1-800-COYOTE number is a hellish lot easier than admitting my old man Coyote is in my system once again. His hand swiping the word, the link, the note, or whatever it is he doesn't care for. And there Mark never quite believes what I say. The work is haunted, and I never press the point. Who would want to read something so full of empty shadows, of past demons anyway? We all know nothing. Storyteller 8, by the way, is the link that talks about nothing. We all know nothing we would do will ever erase what has gone before, spending all of your time wondering why your ghosts come to you or what rights the past has to keep its shades busy coloring the now. It's just a waste of time. Keep it tied to your soul and go on breathing. Coyote 13, by the way, is where Coyote decides not to destroy the world, so we have to keep on breathing. So there's another layer of meaning when you go back and understand the constraints. Thoughts of what haunts this fragile glass atoms that underlie everything is more than enough to freeze the breath of your soul. Mark is probably right to deny the power of storyteller, existence to such odd coyote things as ghosts, and here the storyteller becomes the ghost or pasts, and you get a different meaning for the word directions. I've got about 5 minutes. While I'm here, and I'm not going to get chased off the stage, this work is really the underpinnings for quite a few of my later works. And if you go to, do denelarsen.net/MMF, you will see Modern Moral Fairy Tales, which uses all of these types of tools in somewhat perverted fashions on an HTML work. So if you wanted to see these kinds of techniques being used, go to my Modern Moral Fairy Tales. While we're here, I can just tell you a little bit about the rest of these. Mystic Knot, and it's not for, this really isn't a mystic story, is about a traffic barrier who becomes sentient and people who worship him. And so you get all these ties of storylines together. Crossed Ends is about a retirement party, and you see the father, the mother, and the kids going, well, what comes after retirement? And he says his final sayonara. Okay, fine, I won't do that. Be nice. Seed Voices talks about a woman who's about to have an abortion. And again, if you click on return, which I keep doing, when you first start, you are forced to follow links. In the 1990s, following a link at all was a very odd concept. So we thought that it would be a good idea. I thought it would be a good idea to force people to do links. But this is a nice little argument where nobody is listening to anyone. And they should be, because they're talking about a child in her body. We did Century Cross. Interlocked, and there's a reason why these two are very close to each other, and they have the same kind of format. Whereas this is a story of a lover talking about an abortion that should not happen, and they're not listening to each other. Interlocked is the story of two memories. The father's incest is interfering with the lover's present. And if you click on any of these, okay, fair enough, locked images go into reality. So you can get the story of the father and the incest. Again, there's a lot about nothing here. On good days, my father would hold me in his belly. You can also get the story of the lover and their first sex scene. You can also go into the interlocked center. So this becomes a story, and you don't know whether this is past or present and what's going on here. Then if you try to find out and you hit return, you simply get back to a beginning, which was the, I'm going to get lost in my story here. This beginning card, oh no, wait, I lied. This is the ending card. Anyone who leads her life by a pack of assorted memories deserves what she gets. But as this is the ending on the default, because you can't actually, oh, okay, yeah, you can go further, sorry. As this is the ending on the default, you get back to he doesn't know how this should be. So you're getting into a loop of you deserve what you get, you don't know what you get. So you've got a reversal. I did a lot of tricks where you get reversals, you get this center where you cannot come out of, because the stuff that we were just seeing is you're always locked in the center. There is no way to get out of it. I have 1 minute left, so I will probably conclude with we have now visited everybody except for conventions, which is a fun little story that talks about two women, one who's gone on to have a very colorful life, and the other who is a nun who's had a very cloistered life as convent ions, so the ions of someone's life. If you get a chance, we'll put most of this online, I hope, and you'll be able to see some more of this intricate work. Thank you very much.
So here we are in the Q&A. Thank you, Dene, for such a wonderful reading. That was lovely. So for those of you who are online, Dene has flown in from Denver, Colorado, where she's been living for many, many years. And she's here to do this traversal, but also she gave the Electronic Literature Organization boxes of her archives. And we spent all day the last 2 days going through these boxes, every piece of paper and t-shirts that she sent us in preparation for this event. We pulled out everything that had to do with samplers and went through that material and verified dates and did all kind of archival stuff, which was lots of fun. We'd like to start with some questions. So we're going to be asking questions. Those of you on the online chat can post them. We'll answer them here aloud, and we'll have questions from the small audience we have here that's comprised of the Electronic Literature Lab team and a visitor. So let's start with questions here. Kathleen.
How did you put links in your image?
We have a question. We have a microphone for you.
How did you put the links in your images? I thought it was really cool that you were able to click on different parts of the quilt and then access a different part of the story.
Yes, in Story Space, you are able, I don't know if we can go back to this, but in Story Space, what you're able to do is on any image, you were able to draw a little box, and then it is a beautiful tool. I mean, it was just clean, easy to use. When it works, it was fantastic. But you would be able to put a little box would come up and it would say, where do you want this link? And you were able to take whatever node you wanted and put it there. And you were able to put words in the links. Now, I'm allowed to tell this story, but I was the first person to put a story in those links. And Mark Bernstein, the publisher of Eastgate Systems, Inc., amazing guy, didn't actually recognize what I was doing until he was debugging it. And then he was like, oh, wait a minute, there's a story here. And since we're on, can I say those words?
Yeah.
Okay, so an interlocked, which I showed you a little bit of, that first story, because there's always a story at the beginning, says, I mean I know. Next link is people who've had. Next link is better orgasms. And the next link is on the dance floor. And Mark and I were careful about taking every bit of this work, and it took until that sentence for Mark to realize I was telling a story.
Oh, wow. I thought that was really cool how you were able to do that, though.
In Modern Moral Fairy Tales, I subverted HTML and CSS, so what I have are stories within the the CSS alt tags.
Yeah, that's code work. And I think about Jim Andrews' work in McMahon, Mez Breeze, how they hide stories in the code.
Exactly.
And not just in the comments, but in the code itself.
Well, in Modern Moral Fairy Tales, I did learn finally from samplers, don't hide things. And in Modern Moral Fairy Tales, there are cheat sheets that show all of those codes.
So I'm looking at online to see if there's a question here. People are saying, David Snyder's saying, super cool stuff. I was very intrigued by the artwork growing up with tons of quilters in my family. Thank you so much, Dene. Will Laura says, hi, Dene. That was a wonderful reading. Your stories have very distinct character voices. Other than typeface changes, do you use story space and link structures in the mode of the character?
Yes. Thank you, Will. Yes. That is exactly why each of it's constrained in many different ways, but each of the structures also represents the characters. So the caught out one, she's an 8-year-old, she's really scared, she doesn't understand things very much. So she's very boxed in, and that whole story is about taking things out of the box and breaking them. And you saw that structure was very fragmented. Now Firewheel, on the other hand, is a very contemplative circle that can be done counterclockwise, clockwise, and in fact, I think you saw in the directions it said you could go to directions, or you could use the counterclockwise or the clockwise default paths. But it's much more of a quieter thing that's burning in the center. That bonfire in the center is the structure. So yes, Will, each of the structures do very much correspond with the characters, plot, and I showed you a few of the directions. The directions also correspond like that. The directions that we didn't get to on interlocked, for example, say, go away, do not be here, I don't want to see you, these are my memories, and I shouldn't be here either.
I want to mention to you online we have Megan Hayward
Oh, yeah. Hi.
and Rich Holton.
Hi.
and of course Will Lures that you've already talked to.
The family.
And then lots of students from a digital storytelling class, and then Michael Wilkes is here too. He's one of our Twitter digital storytelling friends. So there's lots of folks here that are excited about your work. Katie wrote and said, I love how the structure also represents the stories and characters. And Will responds to you by saying that seems possible in StorySpace because you compose with the link tool.
It is, you know, honestly, it's most possible in StorySpace. StorySpace made it explicit. You can still do the same thing, and I hope I have. If you compare Disappearing Rain with Modern Moral Fairy Tales, Disappearing Rain is still up, and it has a very different feel in the same sort of structural way. And Modern Moral Fairy Tales does. If you look at both of those links, you can go to www.denalarsen.net. Modern Moral Fairy Tales would be, so MMF for Modern Moral Fairy Tales and /rain for Disappearing Rain. We can put those links up maybe.
Yeah, maybe putting some things
Oh, you
on.
do? Okay. If you look at those and click around in there, you'll see different ways of doing structure and very different ways of showing a tone. So Disappearing Rain is a mystery novel. Modern Moral Fairy Tales is got 4 different levels. It's a Taoist work as well as a fairy tale. So I hope I've been able to capture different structures and different plots and characters within a same type of constraint. Kind of like sonnets.
Yeah,
you can do so much.
We were talking about constrained writing yesterday and how you set these up so that you have this constraint of the quilt with 9 samplers, 9 patches. So that's the first constraint. It's the structural constraint, the metaphorical constraint. Then you have the constraint of the writing within the system itself, you know, StorySpace, and then the computer constraint of the system, which we saw. You're not able to see this on this particular reading, but this afternoon we're going to come back after lunch and videotape her reading through the actual nodes.
Yeah.
So you can see the structure in the background. We can't do that on a computer that shows well in a traversal. So we're going to do that and have that for the book as well. So
and not only that, so it's actually so many layers of constraints because you're going computer, system, so hardware, software, the way that you can do the structured in this, the way that I have structured the works. Then within each of the structures, I have this constraints of how much space I can have on a page, and then I have the constraints of how things have to link. Again, you'll see this much more in Modern Moral Fairy Tales, particularly if you go to the cheat sheets, like the Excel download the Excel spreadsheet that's at the bottom of that link, and you'll see how these constraints can work, and it can be extremely detailed. Yeah.
We have 3 people asking questions. Michael Wilkes says, reading story without recognizing a story in the links level is complete, or is it something additional?
No, that's the problem. It's kind of like a quilt, again. But if you see one little piece of a quilt, you're not seeing the whole landscape. Is a tree complete in itself when you don't see the entire mountain? Yeah, it's a pretty little tree, and I did create these so that, I hope you saw, you can hit return and get a nice little story and go away happy. But there's an awful lot more, so maybe an iceberg would be a good metaphor. We always use that, but you can see the tip of the iceberg and be happy because you see all the pretty colors. You can see underneath the iceberg if you go under the water or you're a penguin and see the colors, but you need to see the entire thing. And maybe honestly, like an iceberg, there's no way to see the entire thing.
Yep. Another question, Megan Hayward wrote, if you get a chance to ask how long it's been since Dene has been able to view or interact with this work, how long is it, and then what does it feel to re-engage with it again?
Oh, now you're going to make me have true confessions. I have not seen the words on that screen for at least 15 years, probably longer. And that was cruel. You were asking me yesterday to go through and go like, and the details of your story 20 years ago. And I'm like, yeah, this is a test. Quote. But no, honestly, I have not seen this work. I've not been able to play with it at least 15 years.
And how does it feel, she wonders, about reuniting with it?
you know, I've really liked samplers, and I learned so much from doing it. And that's why kids did samplers in those old days, was they learned how to piece. This was their testing work. And I am so glad to see how much I've been able to get techniques to work successfully in other places. But yeah, I miss her. It's like seeing your kid after 20 years.
All grown up.
All grown up and hardly recognizable.
Richard Holton wrote, he says, "Hi Dena, speaking of structure, it looks like you decided not to use the story space map view in this work. Would you comment on why you made that decision?" Good question, Rich. Wait for the answer.
Oh, I'm gonna cry. Rich, unfortunately, this is also like seeing your kid in jail. And has been completely destroyed by the experience. There are 3 different versions of this work. The only one that you should ever read is not the one we just read. The only one that actually works is the Mac version, and that one should only be read in the story space version, where you actually can see, like the story space version, for example, of Crossed Ends has each space. The story space version, we were just going through this yesterday, the map version of Seed Voices has the wrong colors. Because, again, we didn't get into Seed Voices, but it's a guy and a girl arguing, and the guy, of course, doesn't listen to her at all because, you know, that's what happens. But the colors are incorrect, so everything is inconsistent, and you only get that from the story space map. So tune in tonight after we read the story space map. When we'll be sure to show them that.
We do that. Yep, we're going to show that. Any questions in here from folks?
I have a question. Hi, thank you for doing the reading again. I know some of the quilted stories are based on true stories. Are there inspirations for the fictional ones?
Oh, all right. Mystic Knot is a sentient traffic barrier in San Francisco. I lived in San Francisco, and I visited that traffic barrier quite a bit. I'm not going to tell you whether it could talk or not. Crossed Ends is a retirement party that when I started in the government in 1991, we had a wave of retirements in 93 because we had this massive reorganization, and I actually saw that argument. Seed Voices, I was not pregnant. But I was married at the time, and I was like, geez, you know, if I had said this. Anyway, the divorce happened about a year later. Century Cross, I was actually, I couldn't drive, so I was stuck in an office building in the Federal Center, in a building that was built on an Indian burial ground, and I have met Coyote quite a few times since then. He's usually pretty nice about things. Sometimes he's not, and I leave. Firewheel, I did go to that bonfire. I saw the fox god, and I lived with the fox. I lived on in Japan, you don't build on the tops of hills. Only a gaijin, which means outside person if you're being nice about it. You can look up the word. It means I was the only gaijin, and then there was a graveyard, and then there were rice paddies, and then there were houses. So I lived in a haunted house for 3 years in Japan. That's what that one is. Interlock did not happen to me, despite what my elderly aunt thinks. Caught Out is really about an Aspie kid and thinking about that type of technology, so that one didn't happen. Convention sort of did. I was a Jewish kid, and due to a long, weird set of circumstances, I went to a Catholic convent school because I couldn't write. My coordination was bad. And this was meeting my friend who actually became a nun. Caught Out did not actually happen. But, oh well, all right. I mean, but at the same time, I did manage, after Caught Out was published, after this was published, I managed to meet somebody who showed me in Rottweil a series of masks that had been in his family for generations. So that was cool.
Very cool.
Yeah, so that's the provenance. Thank you.
Any other questions from folks online or folks in the room? So Dene, I have one, since no one else is going to ask. It's my turn now. Oh, actually, Michael just wrote in, so and then I'll ask my question. So the Mac floppy disk version is like the exclusive version, and I'm interested in it because I am thinking about circulation of eLit. Yes, Michael, this is also on my mind, the circulation of eLit. So Dene, speak to the To the Mac floppy disk version.
Yeah, and I was telling Dene yesterday, if I had my druthers, I would, and if I were rich enough, I would pay Mark Bernstein for every copy of the CD and every copy of the Windows, and I would burn them. And I would see and cackle in glee at the melted plastic. And no, seriously, the only one that you should ever read is the Mac version, which, ironically enough, I do not have. And neither do you, Dene.
No, I don't.
So what's kind of weird here is we are resurrecting and telling her what would have been there. And if anybody happens to have the Mac version, like, because I gave my copy to Myth. Oh no, and I gave a copy to Laurie Emerson at Matt. So if any of you guys have a copy of the Mac version, send it to Greg, who is our brilliant tech here. Dene has the most incredible staff here. It's amazing.
I know.
Just send it to her, and we will be forever in your debt. Because actually, quite frankly, yeah, the one that we read isn't the right one.
So I have over 300 works in my personal collection.
Wow.
And I own a copy of two copies of samplers. One is a CD and one is the diskette for the Windows.
Yeah, which are both wrong.
I don't have the Macintosh version, which makes me really sad. This speaks to how collection happens. I've written about this in various places, but you know, in the early days I was buying, everything was being made on Macintoshes. So
Right.
if you look around the room, you see nothing but Macintoshes because that's what people were using before Windows was licensed to PCs, right? And so I was collecting all these Macintosh versions, and then Mac lost its lawsuit with Windows, and Windows was licensed for PCs, and then artists began making the stuff on PCs. And so I thought, okay, I better get a PC version, and I'd buy that version. So then I had two versions of the work. Then some of the works were migrated to CD-ROM. So then I had three versions of the work. And unfortunately, the version for your work, the CD-ROM, is not Windows and Mac. It is Windows. And that makes it difficult because it means that you're not capturing the actual functionality that was inherent in the Mac version. And there's such a difference between the Mac version and the PC versions of these works. We talked about Stephanie Strickland's True North yesterday and how the style was so different, the functionality was so different.
Yeah.
Even the look and feel of it was just so different.
Stephanie would gladly join me in the bonfire of your works. I will not destroy your stuff. It is the only thing we have, but it's not correct. We will work on getting a real Mac version and maybe correcting her. But at least we have some of the work. This is the Library of Alexandria, and we're just going to get fragments, and that's all there is to it.
Well, we're lucky because the ELO is collecting now, avidly collecting. And so we're not just talking about my particular collection, but the ELO now has 11 collections. It was because of Sarah Smith that we have a copy of Stone Moon, which is your work, unpublished work. And it's because of David Kolb that we have lots of different I mean, David Kolb has given us things, Sarah Smith, you have given us works. Kate Hales gave us 56 works from her personal collection after her retirement. So we're getting all of these in, and we're putting them on the ELO repository so that they're available at some point to other people when we have the copyrights to do so. When we don't, then they'll just be held in reserve for people to come and visit. They can come to the lab and see this stuff face to face.
It really would be an amazing experience for people to come to your lab. Would be just, this lab is wonderful in that you have all the Macs and they're working and you're actually using the works. And up in Boulder, Laurie Emerson's media archaeology lab is doing the same thing, and you can go up there and visit some of these works. I think I gave my last Mac copy to Laurie. And this is where we really need to coordinate with collections and see who has what.
Well, I think what happens is, I've inventoried, well, thanks to Greg and the students in the lab that work with me, we've inventoried all my stuff, and we have it on a database.
Yes.
Laurie has her stuff on a database. We have just inventoried all the works in the 11 collections of the ELO. At some point, we're going to be able to bring all this together so that we can start to do this. I mean, I remember in graduate school wanting to know what libraries held all of Gertrude Stein's stuff. And I know I could go to this library for this work, but I didn't know where all the other works were. And I thought back in the 90s, wouldn't it be cool if we had one big catalog of modernist literature and we know exactly where those works are. It never happened. I never saw it. This is what we can do with this work, and that's my dream. That's what we're trying to accomplish with the repository. And that's Leo, Abby, Nicholas, and I putting that together with the ELO and the Mellon Foundation funding, which has been fantastic.
That is such an important work that you guys are doing. Thank you.
And Megan Hayward just says, I wonder if I have it. We'll check to see. Megan, if you do, I will love you forever if you send it to me.
Yeah, I will too. I will too. We love you anyway.
We love you anyway. And Megan also says extraordinary foresight by Dene and incredible important work being done by Elle. And I would say my colleagues at other labs like Lori, Nick, Jim Brown at, and of course Matt Kirschenbaum at Myth. I mean, so many people are now trying so hard. Eduardo Katz is putting together an archaeology lab at his university, his college. So it's exciting to see what's happening and the recognition that this is important to keep these works alive.
And your traversals in themselves, like we said, we got just the top tip of the iceberg and we didn't really get to see what was in samplers, but at least you got a sample of samplers.
Yep. As I wrote on the chat, she loves puns and wordplay. Are there any other questions? We have a few more minutes. If anyone else wants to ask something.
Michael asked a question on that.
Michael. Oh, okay, Michael Wilk. Yep. And this version is also canonic, or something like that, and a rare example.
Well, actually, you know, the samplers in the Mac version was required reading in Australia for, I think, about 3 years. So, and I don't know what the business arrangements were, and I don't know what the Australians have done with the work. I have no clue. But part of the reason why it was required reading was because it was one of the few that showed exactly what you can do with this. And if I may make another plug, and I really do want somebody to help me update this, but if you go to denalarsen.net/fundamentals, you will see a relatively old work that says, textbook that says, here's how to use links, here's how to use images, and it just explores these things as rhetorical devices, which is, samplers was the first time I was really exploring how to use imagery, structure, links, navigation as meaning, as part and parcel of the piece. My definition of electronic literature is the stuff you can't print out.
I've often said that myself.
You can't print out samplers.
And you don't want to. You don't want to.
But you can't, because you would lose so much of the meaning. Yeah. You just get a chip of the iceberg.
Megan Hayward says, you know, Megan is from Australia.
Oh, yeah.
And so she wrote here and said, it was an HSC text, I think. So maybe we can find that text and keep that in reserve. We're also collecting books about ELIT in here, so we have quite a nice collection started of electronic literature books dating back to the early 90s. So yay. I think that's it for the day, unless there's any other. Megan says, high school certificate, advanced English lit, someone was into hypertext there. Yes. And I'm so glad, because that was rare. The Norton Anthology did publish Jane Yellowlees Douglas's and Michael Joyce's works in one of its, I think, 1997 Norton Anthology of Modern Contemporary Culture, Postmodern Culture. Yep.
It was good.
It was good. All right, so we're going to end by thanking Dene once again for coming. And I want to thank all of you for being online. It's so wonderful to have a mixture of artists and scholars and all of my students that from the digital storytelling class that are there. I thank you all for participating. And of course, my wonderful team here at the Electronic Literature Lab, superstars as they are. Yay, thank you.